Welcome to SIM-PAC Live, where the rubber meets the road. I'm your host, Geoff Matthews, and today I'm going to be talking to Timothy Brake, a chemical engineer and landfill expert with Waste Management New Zealand. Timothy has a unique perspective on waste and the critical role it plays in greenhouse gas emissions. And like the climate scientists of the 1990s, I think we should be listening carefully to what people like Timothy have to say about our current waste and circular economy systems. Welcome, Timothy.
Hi.
Now, Timothy, your quote, you made a quote, it was published in the New Zealand Herald a little while ago, but it caught my eye. And I have attributed this quote to you in several occasions. And so, and when it caught my eye, I thought, I'd really like to interview that person. And so thank you very much for coming on my show and connecting. And the quote was this. It was, the more you know about recycling, the less you sleep at night. And this was from a person, you, who had been involved in waste and landfill for 15 years with a background in chemical engineering. And that quote came with me in a journey I've been on to learn more about plastics. Because when we really get down to it, perhaps the quote can be attributed to plastics. The more you learn about plastics, the less you sleep at night. And
no, it's wider than that.
It's wider than that. Okay. So tell me on your, fill us the viewer in on your journey and how you got to the point of making that statement and what you mean by it.
Well, again, I'm a chemical engineer, so I have a material view of matter as opposed to an object view. And sitting as the gatekeeper to Red Vale Landfill, which is the largest landfill in the Auckland region run by Waste Management, it, I guess, gives a, not say unique perspective, because that's not what I'm trying to say, but it gives a perspective that a lot of people don't seem to have. And I guess, and the issue I have is that, and as I've also said in the article, that recycling is essentially a fraud, and so is the circular economy, because they're not delivering anywhere near what they currently people think they're delivering, but also there is no hope for them because the materials in them aren't sustainable. I mean, I might come back to plastic if you ask me nicely later, but the plastics are essentially used oils. And so if you put it back into the circular economy and use it twice, that's twice as good, or more honestly, half as awful. But all you're doing is maintaining the status quo and giving people hope that they continue to buy polyethylene PET bottles for fizzy drink, and then expect the waste industry to make it disappear into an infinite recycling loop. So even some of the other materials like metals, etc., they're deep spirals. They're not actually fully recyclable materials. The losses across the processes are just more than incremental, and so all of these things are not. I think it's disingenuous to call it circular, and even though everybody wants things to be circular. The only circular materials that are on the earth are what I call the short carbon cycle materials, the materials that are growing today, that came from the CO2 that was breathed out today by you and I. So these are the sorts of materials that offer, a short carbon cycle, circular hope for us. And I think everything else really we need to be very careful on.
Yeah, I've just recorded a SIM-PAC Live on green aluminium, which we only produce a tiny little bit. But once aluminium is produced, it can be infinitely recycled on a very small amount of energy. But we do put contaminants in it that
yes,
make it. So, for example,
we alloy it as well. So each alloy has a different use. But also you have to realise that to stop aluminium from catching fire, we actually oxidise both surfaces significantly. So the actual aluminium is actually reduced. The actual metal inside is actually reduced each time we actually make an object.
Yes. Okay. I get your point. And so when you. Because you also make electricity from methane from your landfill, from the organic material, and I think you've been quoted as saying, anything organic's fine, and anything that isn't is really in this recycling loop is not truly recyclable. You're saying it's either diminishing, or we might only get one more use out of it. And I think he used the example of fleece being used, being made out of plastic, bottles for a second use, but then it comes to be that it can't be recycled from then.
Yes, and that's the point, is that yes, you've taken a PET bottle, fizzy drink bottle, sent it across to China, come back as cheap polyester clothing. That's it. And we can't do anything more with that material. So all we've done is delayed the disposal of that fizzy drink bottle by the product life cycle of the next product. And the problem is we've given people hope when they've put the fizzy drink bottle in their recycling, that they can continue to buy another fizzy drink bottle.
Right, and the fraud word that you use is because people's perception is that we're actually way ahead of the game when we're not, and it's given them a sense of guilt relief that they can take another PET bottle, drink it, throw it away. Oh, and it's going to be recycled. It's fine, and
yes.
and changing those perceptions backwards a step, it's a hard ask, and the truth reality for people suddenly find something, an action or a behaviour they've done for years, is not resulting in the end outcome they thought it was.
Yep.
Right.
And that's the case for all the materials, be it glass, be it steel, be it aluminium, be it the oil-based plastics. The plant-based plastics are actually a separate group altogether. If you want to talk about them later, that's really great. But the problem with the word plastic is it's not actually a technical term that's useful, because it all just means something, when you push it, it stays pushed. That's all the plastic means. So you basically, the materials are either used oils or used plant, and they are quite different worlds as opposed to for climate change, and also for recyclability, because you can break down most plant-based plastics biologically to make the building blocks of life again.
Right. So let's look at the good and the bad. I think that you've talked about this, and the depot that you've been overseeing in Auckland, you generate about, I think, over $12 million in electricity every year from 12
megawatts of electricity, or about 88 gigawatt hours. 88. So make about $7.5 million to the national grid, and we're also part of the base load, of course, because it's a continuous process. And
that's from organic matter that's breaking down naturally, or do you stimulate it?
No, at the moment we're quite relaxed about managing it as an anaerobic digester, so we just let the anaerobes do their thing. But I mean, the classic example is a ton of cardboard can make up to 2 megawatts of sustainable electricity at our landfill, but a ton of cardboard in a compost makes nothing.
Right. Okay, and this is what we call commercial composting, is different from the stuff you would put in your garden composting.
Well, there's two words here. One is compostable, but the real word is composting. So to make compost, you take plant material which contains lignin, which degrades down to humic matter, and it contains NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So compost is the wet sponge that makes the soil contain the water, and NPK. When you put something in a compost that doesn't contain those materials, you don't actually make compost. So the materials may be compostable, but they're not composting. And it's really important to understand that they're not the same thing. Most of the European compostable standards just measure how fast the piece gets to a certain size to fall through a mesh. Places no value on the material as such.
And so compostable and composting, are they still giving off methane?
Well, a perfect compost doesn't bring off methane. Problem is, perfect composts don't exist. So if you can smell composting, there is some anaerobic stuff going on. So, I mean, most composts smell to some extent, and depending on what they're trying to compost, whether they smell, food will make it smell more because food rots quicker, so you end up with more molecules trying to get out at the same time. But basically, compost will produce methane. But again, as with cows, the elderly, and landfills, the methane's coming from a plant or an animal, so it actually has only a short-term effect in the environment. It's not methane from a coal mine.
Yeah. Okay. So, and so you've got, I think I read something like 6,000 trucks a day of waste coming to the landfill.
6,000 tons of waste.
6,000 tons of waste. Okay, 6,000 tons of waste coming into the landfill. How much, and is any of that siphoned off to the recycling? Is it sorted, or is that what goes into the landfill, or you get sorted there?
No, the landfill does no sorting. So if there's going to be sorting, it's through that distribution chain prior to its arrival.
Okay, and so when it arrives in the landfill, what's the process from there? It remains in the landfill itself, and what happens if there are contaminants in it or anything like that?
Well, I mean, we, as the gatekeeper, we have I manage controls. We have a consent as to the levels of contaminants that are legally allowed to be taken in the landfill. It's based on the US EPA's definition of hazardous waste, which is based on their water standards. So basically, we're not allowed to have things that will leach out of the waste and potentially contaminate water supplies.
Yep.
So heavy metals like lead, of course, are persistent. They just stick there wherever they were. So
yep.
Those sorts of materials are okay. But some of the more soluble materials, we have, again, lower limits for those.
Right. Okay. And in terms of what can you, if you're a consumer at home and you've been used to sorting your recycling out, and I know that there's been, it comes out occasionally over a large number of years that your recycling isn't actually being recycled. What, and to sort of give consumers what can they do at home that would actually enable them to sleep easier at night, or can they sleep easy at night?
Well, they need to transfer the process back a step. It's not what they throw out that they have to deal with. It's what they buy. And that I do some lectures, and one of them is on procurement stewardship. Basically, before you buy something, turn around 180 degrees and think, what am I going to do with this when I've finished with it? So if you buy, say, a woolen jumper,
yes.
At the end of the life, when it's got holes, you're not prepared to patch it anymore. If you throw it out, no matter where you throw it, it's going to decay down to nothing. If you buy a polyester jumper, then it's not going to decompose. So it's going to be in a landfill, or if you're an incinerator, it's going to go straight into climate change increment because you're burning an oil. So again, the first step if someone wants to sleep a little better at night is to look at what you buy. So buy the plants and animals that live within your lifetime as materials. Buy yourself a leather handbag. Buy yourself a silk shirt. But again, because when you've made those decisions, then when they've entered your home and eventually will become a waste decision, then you have something that has viability and also potentially extractability. I mean, a ton of cotton t-shirts we can make 2 megawatts of electricity out of.
Yes.
So it's before the home that matters, because if you don't bring it in, waste is a purchasing decision. You have to bring, because the manufacturing process will not step up. So we need to actually send supply signals through the supply chain to say we want more sustainable products by only bringing those into our homes.
Yes. or we do like we've done with plastic straws and just regulate. And and yes, and look, so and what about some of the biggest waste I see, in monitoring what goes out of my house is all packaging. So it's actually not the 100% cotton shirt you buy. And I know I've stood there and looked at the label of this shirt and saying, are these buttons, plastic, or are they, a casein? But then, you're standing there at the counter and they want to put it in, wrap it up for you and then put it in a plastic bag and then put it in another plastic bag. And some of the packaging, as a father, when I had a young girl and getting Barbie dolls would just drive me nuts.
So, well, again, part of that whole process is that we're inclined to look at sustainability either by OPEX or CAPEX. So our operational sustainability, or if we build or buy things, our CAPEX sustainability. So you have like a supermarket who's fixated with stopping lettuce leaves from their veggie centre going to landfill. But what people don't understand is that there's a whole chunk, what I call of sustainability, which is basically what we give or sell to others. And so the vast majority of a supermarket's unsustainability is leaving via the trolleys from their front door. And so I believe that what we need to do is provide people with choices. So if you have a more sustainable solution at the supermarket, it may be twice the price of the other material, but at least you're going to have a choice. At the moment, it's all come in plastic, whether you like it or not. So at least we need if you are going to produce products and services, you should be looking at providing at least a small wedge of a more sustainable solution and let your customers choose whether they're prepared to pay the extra for it. But if all you've got is an unsustainable product mix, then they can't choose anything apart from not buying it.
Yes, and consuming less across the board is a movement that's gathering momentum, especially in clothing. Interestingly enough, fast fashion. And I saw, you might have seen online the picture of the clothing pile in the Atacama Desert, which is just wrong on so many counts. It's not funny.
Yes, I guess less is good, don't get me wrong, but the problem is that we actually have to go past that sort of point. And if we look at less from a residual waste perspective, 100% cotton shirt or 100% woolen jumper has no residual waste, and that's I guess the other way of looking at waste from a material perspective is what's left after a biological system or a fire has actually burnt it or consumed it in its various formats. And so, sheep have been around for 20 million years. Where's the great piles of wool on the planet? It isn't there because, again, there's no residual waste associated with that particular material.
Yes. And from and does recycling itself and these different materials that you've got coming in or you're seeing come in, are there any other centres that provide a profitability centre? Like I'm talking here aluminium cans or steel recycling or bits and pieces, or is it all going into not only what you call a spiralling loop? It's not truly circular, but it's economically expensive as well.
Basically, none of them make sense. We've given people the false sense that recycling materials are a resource, and therefore they want to be paid for it, as opposed to dispose of it. So a lot of these things are done at really marginal cost, and the only thing that's driving them from a marginal cost perspective is the distortions in the waste industry with levies and other and subsidies. But if you extract the levies and subsidies from all of these things, none of them make sense because they don't make sense. There is no value in it for anybody to afford to do it. And then when you add the waste kilometres and all those other things in the background, which is also, I guess, hidden from an emissions perspective, it becomes even more less sustainable. And I guess that's the bit I have a great concern about, is that this is like a Ponzi scheme. The governments and that will continue to try and fund all these things up to have some activity, but when they realise it's not actually getting us anywhere and they pull the plug out, we're going to be left with a whole lot of facilities that aren't going to be viable.
Yes. And in the meantime, by subsidising the end of life of a product, let's just say the government, by subsidising recycling and waste disposal, was subsidising you disposing the end of life of it, makes it just so much easier to buy to start with. And it quickly, if you couldn't dispose of anything, your house would be so full of stuff that you'd have to stop bringing new stuff in.
That's right. And another one of my throwaway lines I say is, if you're not prepared to throw it in the sea, don't buy it, because some of it's going to end up there.
Yes, and I saw that comment, and I thought about this maybe as a behavioural, and I was just talking to a behavioural scientist just before, but the problem is I've seen people that would just throw stuff in the sea, and where somebody like myself wouldn't have the conscience to do it. I think other people do it without thinking about it. And so I was.
But some of the things you've brought over the years have ended up in the sea, whether you've liked it or not. But also, you can throw stuff in the sea. You can throw a brown paper bag in the sea. It doesn't matter. I mean, that's the point of the process, is that you can throw stuff in the sea. Fish and things will eat stuff. You can throw a piece of meat in the sea if you want to, minus the hook, because again, the systems there are treated as food. The problem when we add inerts like microfibers and that is that anything that was fibrous and floating around the sea over the last 3.5 billion years, the food chain just thought, oh, that's something to eat, so they eat it, and so it fills up the process. And I remember going fishing once, and I caught a snapper, and it had a plastic bait trying to shit it out whatever the hole is out the back, and I thought, I'm never going to use plastic baits ever again.
Yeah. So, look, thank you for talking to me. I don't know if I'm going to sleep any easier tonight, but in some ways you've summed up what I've been thinking. That how you consume and what you take home from the store, and if you look honestly at your own rubbish disposal every time you take it out. It seems our desire, and perhaps it come from a drive for food safety or something, but there's so many things come wrapped in plastic that I look at how much I eat and how much it's not actually food waste, it's packaging waste from it. And as a consumer, there's only one thing you can do, is try and step up yourself and try and look at it and say, do I really need to put that in a plastic bag, or could I just take it home with everything else, and maybe I have to wash it when I get home, but so be it. That's my fresh fruit and vegetables.
Well, largely yes. But again, the supermarket has to have a section where it's not wrapped in plastic. I mean, buy a Telegraph cucumber that's not wrapped in plastic, I don't think you'll find one. I mean, that's the sort of issues that they have. But I mean, they could wrap it in a plant-based plastic like PLA, polylactic acid polymers. It's still not composting, but it is compostable. Or again, a ton of it will make landfill gas and make electricity because it's just sugar. But yeah. I mean, there is those sorts of solutions.
So the use of sugar cane fibre and stuff, like to make we've got a taco chain here in Australia that make their bowls, instead of making them out of plastic, they're out of a sugarcane fibre. And I know you said that won't make electricity if you put it in the land. It's not going to be.
Well, no. It will make electricity. What it won't do is it's not composting, because it doesn't actually break down fast enough to make compost.
Right. Okay. So, but it will break down in a landfill, and
Yeah, it may take 10 years. Some of those, the lignins are quite hard to degrade.
right, 10 years. But we're looking at 150 to 500 years for some of the plastics to degrade.
Well, yes, and they're also based on the long carbon cycle. So when they finally do degrade, up go the CO2 levels in the atmosphere in generations to come, which is even more, I guess, sneaky for future generations. Is this all this stuff we're actually putting in as legacy materials? I mean, one of the things I also say is if we want to be sustainable in the future, we must concentrate on the things with the longest product life cycle, because at the end of that product life cycle, it'll still be what it is. If you want to be sustainable in 20 years' time, you've got to put down a woolen carpet now, because in 20 years' time, that nylon carpet is still nylon.
Yes. And I saw in New Zealand there was a debate, a legal case actually, between the manufacturers of nylon carpet and the manufacturers of wool carpet, and the nylon saying they had less embedded CO2, which as you know, it embedded CO2 over 20 years, and that embedded CO2 of the nylon carpet is going to be there forever. I haven't seen the outcome of that, but I know it was in New Zealand courts, and I know it seemed to me to be ridiculous. So.
Yeah, as I said, I'm just a thought process. But again, product life cycle is really important. We're inclined to go after the low-hanging fruits when we need to really look at the long product life cycle embedded carbon, especially if there's a potential, like a plastic, for it the find of its life to be oxidized and create climate change when we really don't need any more.
No. Here we go. What we do, and I've said also to kids I meet, young kids today. And I say, do you know what your lasting legacy on the planet will be? You know, what will be here in 500 years? It's your disposable nappy. And it seems to shock them into the reality that some of the stuff that we're doing is going to be around a very long time.
And more disposable nappies are made for adults than for children.
Right. Okay. I didn't know that fact. So I learned another thing today.
I didn't know that till 10 years ago. It was not knowledge I found terribly appetizing as I get older. But anyway, it's something to think about. The turnover point was about 12 years ago from the manufacturing of diapers globally. So there now more diapers are made for adults than children.
Right. Okay. Well, look, perhaps on that note, we will end this conversation. It's been very good talking to you. And it's a discussion. As I said, I don't know if I'm going to sleep better at night, but at least we had a discussion. And thank you for also your personal contribution, because we don't get many people who are in the recycling business or the waste management recycling get up and saying, actually, this is wrong. We're doing it the wrong way around. And it's quite interesting, and it was really interesting to have you on the show. Thank you very much, Timothy.
You're most welcome.